Hello and welcome to Bespoke Unit. I'm CP and in this video I'm reviewing Dos Maderas Rum. As per usual, we'll be using the Bespoke Unit Liquor Formula for this review. This is the universal version that can be used for all alcoholic spirits, including rum and whiskey, which were initially separate formulae. Unfortunately, I've run out of color ink on my printer, so these are in black and white, but I rest assured it does look good. And if you're in a hurry and don't have the time to watch the entirety of this video, just look in the description below where you'll find the full written write-up, which will include the PDF versions of these very formulae. I thought it would be quite an interesting experiment to review these two rums side by side for two reasons. Firstly, if you're not familiar with Dos Maderas Rum, this will give you a great introduction. And similarly, if you have already heard about them and perhaps you're deciding which rum to buy, this will probably give you a good indication. Dos Maderas Rum is an interesting experiment or project by Williams and Humbert Sherry in Jerez, Spain. What they have done here is that they are taking or importing rums that have already been aged in the Caribbean, so Guyana and Barbados, and then they're further aging them in their own facilities in Spain. And with this, they've created two distinctive products. The first is the double-aged rum, which is aged for 5 years in the Caribbean and then a further 3 years in Palo Cortado sherry casks. And then they have the 5+5, which has been aged for 5 years in the Caribbean, like the first one, but then for 3 years in Palo Cortado cask, and then a further 2 years in Pedro Ximenez sherry casks. If you're not familiar with these type of casks, I suggest that you head to our sherry guides, which is linked below. This will give you a good overview of the different types and their different characteristics. So technically, although these are Caribbean Spanish-style rums, they have undergone a prolonged aging process in Jerez, Spain. They're both Añejo rums. They're both based from molasses. The age statements are slightly different. There's only 2 years different technically, with the 5x5 being the triple age version. It has been aged in Palo Cortado and PX casks, as well as the initial 5-year aging process. There are no additives that I know of. However, we will comment on that in a little bit. And chill filtration, I'm not aware of whether this has been used at all. In terms of alcohol by volume, you're looking at 37.5 with the double aged, whereas it's 40% with the triple aged. So we'll jump straight into the Robe. And as you can see, I have two nice little Glencairn style tasting glasses. These were the best ones that I had for the occasion because my normal Glencairn glasses, I only have one left. The others were broken in the dishes. These have got Lefroy 2018 written on them because I actually got them when we did a guided tour over in the Island Isla a couple of years ago. And that was a great experience. I highly recommend it. So let's take a look at the Robe with these two. So as you can see, perhaps in this video, and if you can't see very well, look in the description below, head to the write-up where you'll see close-up photos. We have a very strong difference in the hue. Now, I'd be surprised if 2 years of additional aging, even if it's in PX casks, which is a red grape, would result in such a strong difference in color. I imagine that some coloring has been used, but then perhaps I'm wrong. And if you do know the answer to that, please leave a comment below. So here we're looking at a more antique brass color for the double aged, whereas it's more like a tawny port color for the triple aged. Both are quite crisp, they're not very hazy, and in terms of viscosity, it's significantly higher in the triple aged. It's very oozy, it's quite syrupy, whereas the double aged is a little bit lighter. Next, we'll be moving on to the nose. So first of all, with the double aged, it's quite mentholated in terms of nose feel. It's quite bracing. You expect some notes of marzipan, a little bit of almond, some apricot and golden raisin, which I imagine is an influence from the Palo Cortado sherry cask. It's not overly intense, although it's certainly present on the nasal receptors. It's quite complex, but it's very nicely balanced. In comparison, the triple aged is going to be much more on the Venus raisin side. Here we have a very distinctive raisin note. The nose feel is quite peppery in comparison. There's some spices, a little bit of nutmeg, and a soft vanilla edge to it. It's just as balanced as the double-aged. It's a little bit more complex, certainly with the presence of this vinous characteristic, which I've likened to ratafia, actually, which is a beverage quite popular in France, which is made from the remains of grape musk. You can find the most popular one in the Champagne region, but it's also present in other winemaking regions. I think that Auvergne has a very well-known one, as does Burgundy. So it's very strong on the winey side. And otherwise, though, it does compare. It's a little bit more intense, but it's not as bracing. It's much softer on the nose. So next, we're going to take a look at tasting these. And I've got a bottle of water here under the desk. I'm going to sip that in between the two because I don't want my palate to be too overwhelmed or clash. So let's start with the double-aged. So overall, a very umami primary flavor, lightly brought on by the Palo Cortado aging process. Palo Cortado sherry is quite unique in that it is kind of a crossover between an Amontillado and Oloroso sherry style. The reason being that Amontillado is a type of sherry that starts off like a fino sherry, which means that it is aged under a layer of yeast called flor. And this basically protects it from oxygen and gives it quite a yeasty and dry flavor profile. Whereas Oloroso sherry uses oxidative aging, which means it only, it's too strong for the flor to grow. And so there is direct air contact through the wood of the barrel. Amontillado sherry basically stops this halfway through the aging process, whereas Palo Cortado will stop it much earlier and used to be an accident, and that the flor would die by accident, so then they just carry on aging it and call it Palo Cortado. But nowadays, this is engineered and done intentionally. So it does have a very dry profile. It's more on the oxidative than flor in terms of flavor, but we'll get to that in a second. The mouthfeel is quite peppery compared to the nose feel that was mentholated. It's a little bit coarse. It's not super smooth. There is a little bit of roughness around the edges, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's quite complex. You get some good flavor. It's harmonious on the palate, and then the length is quite long. In the opening, we're looking at some conference pear, some cinnamon, and some mandarin right on the tip of the tongue. And then when you get into the heart, expect some dried apricot, maybe even the kernels of apricot. A little bit of brine comes in, which offers a certain saltiness, and then there's some almond, which really kind of echoes that apricot kernel effect. Then once you get into the finish, expect some cedar, so you get some wood starting to come in, some yeastiness probably brought on by the kind of leftovers of whatever flor was in the barrel, and some butter, because there's a nice creamy finish that does leave a nice oily and buttery presence on the palate. So now here we are with the triple age. Let's give this a sample as well. What's incredible is that this is almost completely different. You cannot tell that this turned into this with just 2 additional years of aging in Pedro Ximenez sherry cask. In fact, there may be a different blend after all. The rums that were used came from different locations, Guyana, Barbados, Caribbean, which is almost a little bit generic. So it could just be Guyana and Barbados. So there may be some differences in the blend. There may also be some additives. There's some coloring, some caramel, who knows. Still is quite a step away from this. So overall, it's very sweet, whereas the double age was umami. In terms of the mouthfeel, it's very creamy. There's no pepperiness. It's far smoother. It's just syrup that coats the palate. The complexity is about the same, just a little bit of additional complexity. The flavor is much richer. In terms of harmony, though, I would actually say that the double age is more balanced because this leans so far forward on the palate. It's very sweet. The double age, though, does cause a little bit of salivation. You saw that perhaps I was struggling to speak after talking about the when talking about the palate of the double aged, whereas here I don't have that issue. And then in terms of length, this is a little bit longer. In terms of length, they're quite similar, just the length is going to be quite different because this is more on the sweet and the syrupiness, whereas this was much drier and it was much more on the kind of peppery flavors that kept coming up from a nice afterburn. So as for its actual flavor profile in the opening, you can imagine a little bit of almond oil, some red grape, and orange peel that really mix together, which leads then onto a heart of raisin. So red grape in the opening, but then it becomes sort of sweeter, caramelized, dried raisin in the heart, some dark chocolate, and some marmalade. So again, we have the orange peel in the opening, and then in the heart, it's kind of being cooked, it's been preserved, it's been caramelized into a much richer and spicier profile. And once you get into the finish, you've got some marzipan, which probably is maybe a hint at the Palo Cortado, so the yeastiness, the marzipan, the almond essence, there's some cinnamon, so a little bit of spice, and then salted caramel. And the salt is just a sprinkle. You don't have much, it's mostly in the caramel. So overall, we have two very different rums here. In terms of overall experience, as you can see, the bottle shape is identical. Indeed, they've used the same one with the same details of pressed glass. However, the labels are completely different. This has gone for, the double H has gone for a more rustic vintage map to denote the idea that this rum has traveled a lot during the aging process, whereas this has gone, the triple aged here has gone for a transparent, more premium style label. As for the packaging, the double aged doesn't come with any packaging, but you get a nice cardboard canister with the triple aged. I think the details on this, there's a lot of attention to detail, some gold lettering, some embossing. It does look fantastic, and I do like the color as well, which echoes the liquid as well. And then in terms of versatility, so as I'm going to say in a couple of seconds, I find that the double aged is going to be more versatile in the different uses. You can make more cocktails with this, whereas the triple aged is going to be very much focusing on easy sipping. It's hard to really integrate into a cocktail unless you're a very creative mixologist. And then when it comes to the occasion, the double aged is going to be a more casual drink, although still quite affluent as well. It's different, it's rare, it's unique, and the triple aged is going to be a little bit more formal. It's very refined, and I just noticed a nice little detail here is when you take the foil of the lid off, you get this nice little compass detail here on the cork, and the cork is of excellent quality too. And then this moves on to the value. In both cases, the value is excellent. You're looking at about 35 bucks for the double aged and 40 to 45 for the triple aged. The only issue is they're quite hard to find. I haven't found many online retailers in the US that has them. In Europe, though, they're much easier, and there seems to be more distribution. So in the US, you'll probably have to look around a little bit before you can find yourself a bottle. And this finally leads me to cocktails and pairings. So in terms of cocktails for the double aged, you're going to have a lot more versatility here. You could have it on the rocks, which isn't really a cocktail, but this would be personally how I'd enjoy it, either on the rocks or with a drop of water to take some of that edge away. You can have it in a dark and stormy, so with a little bit of ginger ale that can really add some spice to it, or as a Cuba Libre with some Coca-Cola. Meanwhile, the triple A's, I wouldn't really have this in a cocktail. Perhaps it's just the limitations of my experience. Reinhardt could probably leave a comment and say differently. However, I would consider it in a hot buttered rum, nice warm drink for the winter, quite spicy. This will add an element of sweetness and syrupiness to that experience, which would be very nice as well. And then when it comes to the overall pairings, for the double-aged, I would be leaning towards things like fish pie, given that there were some elements of yeast, some brine, that would go quite well. Or you could go for something a little bit different, which is a dessert. A key lime pie would be quite adventurous. As for cigars, I would probably consider a Connecticut wrapper cigar like this Perla Del Mar here by J.C. Newman. Meanwhile, the triple A's in terms of pairings, this is going to be much more on the dessert side of things, so a sticky toffee pudding or maybe some dark chocolate. And as for cigars, I've opted for a Magnum 54 by H. Upmann. This is a Cuban cigar. It's going to have the same level of refinement. It's going to be quite delicate as well. Given that this is quite mild and smooth, you don't want a cigar that's too strong. The H. Upmann is going to be just the right level of strength in terms of body and nicotine, so it won't overwhelm the rum in any way, shape or form. So there you go. These are two very interesting rums from Williams and Humbert in Spain. They do offer a unique experience. If you're a Diplomatico fan, I'd certainly try the triple aged. It's very reminiscent of the Exclusiva Reserva. And if you like sort of more bold rums that have a dryness rather than sweetness, the double aged is something that you ought to look out for. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give us a like, give us a subscribe. And if you know of these rums and if you've tried them, leave your comment below with some of your feedback and your experiences. And if you have any questions about them, leave a comment as well. Until our next video, head to bespokeunit.com, see all the other lifestyle subjects that we cover. I'm sure that there'll be something you love. We also have a whole rum resource, which is bespokeunit.com/rum, as well as a sherry resource, which is bespokeunit.com/wine/sherry. You can see the links for those in the description. I'm sure you'll find something that you will love to learn about.